Good morning one more time. Everybody awake this time? That's better. Excellent. By brief way of intro to this session before we get really into the meat of it. I work almost exclusively with customers in cloud. AWS is a huge investment for us, a fantastic partner. We see many organizations that struggle with security especially, and largely struggle with migration as a general topic when getting existing workloads out of a data center into the cloud. For the federal space, this can be especially painful. There can be significantly greater barriers in terms of compliance regimes or certifications that are necessary. And one of the things that we found especially important at Trend Micro working in this space is looking for partners who are really excellent and really experts at moving through these types of blockers and helping organizations to move quickly with not only security, but also with the entirety of the space. And we look really hard for those partners who are at the top of the game and able to integrate our solutions with theirs and help unblock organizations moving quickly. So I want to invite Bernie to spend some time with you first and talk about the blockers, the challenges that he sees in the market, and especially in the federal space, and how RainCloud is able to help address those for organizations.
Sure. Hey, good morning. I just wanted to briefly kick off this with a few blockers that we see across the space. As a federal agency, the first thing would be, how do I get there? Because I have an enterprise, I have my boundary, I have my data centers. I have been operating this for the past few decades. Now I want to move that boundary or extend the boundary into the cloud, right? So that's network connectivity. How do we get that network plumbing in place, either having threat enforcement before or after? But that's been one of the things that we work with our SOC NOC to make sure that we take our existing GSS and all these enforcements that we have in the data center and move that into the cloud boundary, second. And the second one is once we have the path, the second thing that we see is I'm used to having my SOC, my single pane of glass, I have my management services, my security stacks, and I'm good with that. How do I get these in the cloud? These are called, refer them as shared services, common services, or extending the GSS into the cloud. So these are the management services that I will have to have in the cloud to manage the assets in the cloud boundary, and as well as secure these workloads by having endpoint protection, my file integrity monitoring, my vulnerability scanning, my SIEM, all that in the cloud as well. So those are called common services, or you can call them VDSS, virtual data center management services. The third thing is, how do I make sure that my SOC has visibility into the new boundary that I have extended, the cloud boundary? So having those cybersecurity incident management and roll-ups on my logs and all that pushed into that so that I have SOC having visibility as a single pane of glass into both my boundaries is a key thing, right? And then the last thing, the blocker that I see is I have a compliance regime, either DoD moving from DICAP to DoD RMF or having the NIST RMF. How do I make sure that I implement these controls in this logical boundary on Amazon and make sure that the controls are implemented right, they have been assessed right, and then I can make sure that these controls are operating at the level which I'm expecting them to operate. I want to make sure there's deltas that I know, any changes that's happening. So these are a few of the blockers when you look at it: network connectivity, having common services, cybersecurity, and making sure that I have an ATO, and also do continuous compliance. These are the few blockers that we see across the space.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
One of the most common questions. So walk us through sort of what are the most common questions or challenges that you get from federal CIOs directly, and what's your approach for walking through those with an organization and how to address them?
Yeah. So the first question that when you look at it, as here what we depict here is agency basically extending their existing boundary into the cloud, with having the threat with either peering in a public location. How do you implement logging at scale? Basically have that. How can I audit? How can I monitor my systems in that cloud space, right? So when you look at this, we basically, the response to that is, DoD has this functional requirement that's been released to the public. It's called the SCCA, Secure Cloud Computing Architecture Functional Requirement. So we kind of codified that functional requirement into a stack. As you can see here, I have a VDSS stack, which is my virtual data center security stack that I'm fronting my network termination into that VDSS stack. And then I have my VDMS stack. These are the management services, having all the endpoints and everything else in here, so that I have my zones set up in a way that I operate. You'll have the production zone, the pre-prod, QA, dev, and all these. So one of the key things that we see is we have been used to the tools on premise that we can have these implemented, have been implemented in the cloud, in the on-premise boundary for a long time. We would look at them to see how we can extend them. If not, how can I have a new capability in there so that I can do the logging, auditing, and monitoring at scale? Because the key is codifying this and having infrastructure as a code, and then also security and software as code, so that you can have deployments done using pipelines. Either you basically are setting up a foundation or moving an application or rolling up the logs from your cloud enclave to your SIEM, or maybe having your vulnerability management, patch management. So these are the things that we'll have. We expect customer to do it at scale.
Excellent.
Okay. I mean, the next question is the policy enforcements. When you look at, how do I make sure that I have my preventive controls, my detective controls, and all these controls that I have in place, how can I enforce these in the cloud, right? So when you look at, the preventive side of it, we want to make sure that you're moving security to the left, which means I basically build my infrastructure stack, software baked in it, apply my security configurations, and basically go through test automation so that I can test it for security, test it for scale, and do all the test automation to the left so that I can make sure that all my configurations are applied, I'm latest on my patches, and I have all the vulnerabilities fixed, and then have my application security tested on the left side. So that what you're doing is, once you have that code base that has gone through these testing and have been blessed off, we can move them through the pipeline. So having that codified automation to capture the risk should be captured early in the phase. It's not an exercise where I'm moving an application to the cloud and I'm trying to be reactive to basically assess my risk posture and trying to find my threats on a stack that's already deployed in the cloud enclave in production, right? So I want to be preventive so that I'm doing all that up front. Detective is basically making sure that you have mechanisms in place with all the native Amazon tooling, that we can have all these logs from the endpoints, from the cloud and all that, having them roll up to and having the correlation done and finding any things that are drifting from your baseline. Those are, you want to make sure that you have a mechanism that you're detecting things that are changing from your secure baselines. And then, some of the things that we can do, that we do as a codified way is having self-healing mechanisms. What I mean is, if you have a change, a drift in your baseline, I can basically have somebody fix it. But if I can take that, take that fix and then have that as a secure document and use the document to basically execute that when the same thing happens the next time. So moving to a lot of automation, so where you codify things, where you can detect things and auto-heal them, and also having those, mapping of the next one is, how do you basically assess your threats and risk and security profiles in the cloud, right? So for me when we look at this, I need to know what I have in my extended boundary. That's the key thing. And I want to make sure that I know what's running on that. And then I want to make sure that all my STIG compliance, security, all that secure configurations are applied. I want to know where I am. Is it, do I have, once I run my STIGing, maybe I'm at 99% compliant. maybe in a week, I want to know where I am. What has changed? Is it something changed because I'm seeing a deviation from that? And then I want to make sure that I have my IAVMs, and then I want to know the assets that basically I have to apply these mitigations on them. And then coming to configure the compliance. Having the controls and the control implementation and using tools like Trend Micro to Telos to continuously monitoring the posture of that control, and having that continuous compliance is an important thing as well. And also having a threat map of all your assets and the threats based on your portfolios, and mapping them and trying to drill down to that asset or to that control, to that baseline that has a drift is a key thing. With all that, you want to make sure that you have cost enforcements applied. What is it costing me right now to run this infrastructure or this application in the cloud? Is it going up? Is it going down? I want to make sure that I control the cost. And the other one is my security posture management. With all this done, I want to know the posture. So what is security posture, right? It is about having your user behavior analysis, having your network monitoring done, having your posture so that some of these things that you are assessing them continually. And then also having your network security so that once a packet moves in from, into the Amazon enclave, I know, what's happening with that packet inside that thing. So you'll have to assess these assets continuously so that first thing you got to know what I have on there, what are the configurations I have, and what's the baseline, and make sure to test the drift in the baseline, and also make sure that you're continuously monitoring it. And then, it should be, you should have a way, the other question we see is, how do I see my threat maps? What am I dealing with in this enclave? So that I know that I can have a, what is my auto-healing framework doing? How many did I heal? Does my auditors have access to the things that I have detected and basically remediated? What are these things? So you need to have an out-of-box dashboards that basically visually give you what's happening in the enclave, right? And then some of the best practices for management. As you can see, another blocker that I didn't talk about is the workforce. I need to make sure that we have the workforce that's ready to go to do the cloud migration. But there's also another approach, where you can use a low code, where you basically can have, frameworks that can generate code, which is a low code approach, where you can have that code generate your stacks that you can deploy that using your CD pipelines. So that can help you from your resource management to staffing and tools to gain efficiency in the cloud.
Fantastic. So we've got here, let's see. So I just want to try and recap here and walk through with you. So looking to number one, you're recommending that we really need to be able to define the standard for how we're deploying repeatedly across all the pipelines. Right? So we're going to get past the ability to understand what the standardization is, how it maps back to our original premise infrastructure that we're moving off of. I love that. It's fantastic. Sounds like the second thing is really the ability to codify the way that that's deployed out throughout the environment, and ensure that you have consistency in mapping each of your environments from dev all the way to prod, same set of controls. Visibility seems to be a really huge theme. I suspect that many of you out there have also seen a lot of dynamic workloads, no matter how you're deploying it, and understanding where those fit into my security landscape and then also my threat landscape can be really key. And then logging, auditing, and monitoring is what drives all of that visibility.
Right.
Fantastic. All right, great. I really appreciate that. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
What do you look for then what are some top things that you're looking for when you're trying to deploy all of this, right? So it sounds like there's one really, really big theme here.
Yeah, the big theme basically is to automate to the nth level. So when you look at the SCCA and the functional requirements, basically you'll have to look at the requirement, either securing your enclave or basically managing the enclave or doing trusted credential management. you'll have to make sure that you find an ISV that can basically help you deploy this capability to meet that function requirement in a hybrid environment, and then have that ISV make sure that they can use some native services in the cloud. Either trying to scale with the workload, rather than trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. The solution should basically work, and then should also have a way to deploy the ISV solution as a template, as a blueprint, so that you can bring the baseline up, but also apply the configuration so that it is deployed in a way that is consistent with the deployment method. So we look at ISVs, create standard blueprints, harden those templates, and basically go through the control implementation and then do that. So we see trend in basically using as ISV in most of our SCCA deployments. That's where we see we need to find the right ISV to do that.
Fantastic. So let's walk through a couple of those properties for a security product. And I usually like to mention I didn't get to invent any of this stuff. I'm not that bright. Everything that we look at and everything that we as an organization, as a product team, strive to do, we've learned from partners like Rain, and we've learned from working with organizations like yours how best to fit in these environments. And even before we started really investing heavily in our partnership with AWS and with progressive SIs like Rain, we know that security, and we learned well that security is largely a function of fit and ensuring that we're able to model how we deploy, how we provide services, how capabilities and security controls are provisioned, modeled after the way that your organization is deploying technology. If square peg, round hole, Bernie's words, not mine, is a fantastic example. I can't tell you how many organizations I've gone to work with, and they're deploying AWS EC2 instances left and right. They're provisioned programmatically. They can make a change in Git, which results in entire fleet being redeployed. And then someone has to go manually touch a security console in order to be able to apply controls to those workloads. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to us. The number one thing that's part of fit for purpose for us in the way that we view security in AWS is the ability to fit into an ecosystem and the native pipeline deployments that you're using. So many traditional security tools are tied to the host itself. Right? They're tied to the operating system. You installed an agent, and now we know which operating system we're on, and life's great, we can move along. In AWS, that model really doesn't hold true anymore. We see many organizations that want to bake all of their tools in as early as possible in the pipeline. They want to be able to create that standard definition that they can deploy repeatably into every environment and ensure the smallest deviation from the outset that they can then monitor over time. So we look for ability to have tools that have the ability to track the way that the native infrastructure tracks the identity of a server. In this case, an instance ID, right? So that if my agent is installed and then suddenly it wakes up after having been sealed into an AMI and then launched and then baked and then sealed all over again, that inventory is tracked, because by the time we get back to my threat map and my visibility, my operational dashboard, the security control needs to be in sync with the way that the rest of the infrastructure is viewed. That inventory lifecycle is hugely important, and one of the top keys that I would ask you to walk away from is to be looking for partners, especially in security, but even across the infrastructure, who are looking at that native integration as a top-level investment to be able to talk directly to the infrastructure APIs, in this case the EC2 API endpoint, to be able to live real-time sync and collect intelligence from the environment. The second thing that I would urge you to consider strongly, this is always really funny for me. I worked with an agency probably 2 years ago now, and so, I am a product guy, and we're getting on the phone, and we're going to talk about what deep security does. And I think we had 90 minutes scheduled for a call. It was a pretty big deal. And I asked the customer on the phone, what's your number one fear in your project? Talk to me a little bit about what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve for the organization. And he described his migration plans and sort of 2 paths forward. He said his number one fear is he has absolutely no idea how he's going to get security controls assigned to tens of thousands of disparate workloads as they're migrated from one infrastructure platform from an existing infrastructure platform into AWS. And I described for him sort of my methodology and what I see working best for most organizations that I talk to in AWS as really creating a platform where we use native descriptions in AWS, EC2 metadata, to tag instances and describe the workload, and then automate assignment of security policy based on that description data.
Right.
And gentleman on the phone, we're about 15 minutes in, said, okay, I'm done. I'm pretty sure a salesperson freaked out 10 minutes into a 90-minute call, we're done. Oh, that's probably a bad sign. And he said, no, we're good. This is great. Like,
Yeah.
this is my number one concern. You've showed me how you address it with other organizations. That's what I need to know. I'm going to go find my procurement person before they go to lunch. This is this is fantastic. And the key for me really is getting to a point where I want partners and application teams to be able to describe workloads in a codified way, right? Create that baseline description and syntax, and then the security needs to be able to read that and move forward, right? Instead of security teams having to go look at dynamic workloads, track whether they're moving up, moving down, just describe workloads accurately and have a security tool with integrations to those native capabilities that assigns a correct security posture and then gives you the ability to monitor that delta.
Right, absolutely.
Bernie mentioned native integration to services. So we've got, talked a little bit about EC2 integration for sure, for inventory management, for metadata collection, to be able to recognize the workload and assign an appropriate security posture. But the back end of that, the eventing is, I don't know, would you say equally important? Maybe more important.
It's more important, yeah.
So you described that we need to be able to track deltas and changes. We need to get all of our eventing in one place. We need to be able to have visibility across an entire infrastructure platform. And AWS provides a ton of fantastic services for this. We look at ourselves as being a piece of the puzzle. Is deep security, you don't have to lie to me, is deep security the only security tool in your stack?
I mean, it is one of the major ISV that we have in place because SCCA has many functional requirements to meet the security deployments and meet the controls. So yeah, we use deep security for the endpoint protection, FIM.
Sure.
Yeah.
But then you've also got how many other logging and security intelligence sources in your environment?
Yeah, I mean, we have at least, for log aggregation, we use the SIEM.
Sure.
And then we use vulnerability management and any kind for transit VPC, and then for security posture management. On the VDMS side, yeah, we have quite a bit of tools that we have to bake in to get that initial stack that we can deploy to bring up that guardrail in the cloud.
So we're in a spot where, as much as we might like to think that we can do everything, we're not the only security tool in your universe, and you've got to be able to get that posture displayed somewhere else, aggregated throughout the infrastructure, in Radar, in your case, most of the time. AWS provides fantastic tools to do this. So we looked for an ability for our customers to be able to use native technology in AWS, ship eventing out to a common platform. And SNS is a really fantastic way to do this for 2 reasons. One, once you're there, you can transform it to basically anywhere. Right? So we can trigger a Lambda, we can write to S3 for long-term storage, we can ship off to a SIEM, we can turn them around, we can create direct alerts in AWS, we can manage the long-term health of them, we can watch trending of our eventing using native AWS tools that we're already consuming for monitoring other bits of the infrastructure. The other reason that, that moved, sorry. The other reason that we really love the SNS integration is that it gives us a great opportunity to offer organizations the trigger for taking new action based on eventing in the security infrastructure. So when you look at technologies like auto healing, capabilities to detect deltas from baseline in an environment and then automatically take action, SNS triggering a Lambda function is a really easy way to low cost, natively integrate capabilities to detect a security incident, as an example of a delta from baseline, and then remediate that. So when you have gone through this process of creating your golden AMIs, when you have codified your infrastructure, when you've created the visibility that, that Bernie talked to us about, now suddenly you get to a security posture state where AWS can automatically remediate that for you.
Right.
And bring you back into baseline, and then again, all the way back to the visibility so that you can track how that happened over time.
Yeah, and also audit the auto healing actions, because that's the key thing. In an enclave where I have automation done and I can detect a drift and then remediate that, but also have a way to have that audit trail so that I can have auditors do that is a key thing. So having those automations done can give you, you can operate things at scale, not only to manage the security posture, but also meet your compliance requirements, right? So.
Absolutely. And then Bernie's big theme, and we love this philosophy on the deep security team, and we love working with customers and organizations to implement these types of technology. API first, driven for developers, integrators, agencies to be able to programmatically deploy everything. That's number one on our list. Deploying the security management stack. Do you have a lot of folks on your team that like to go click through wizards and deploy technologies?
Yeah, I mean, we basically start our engagement with a bootstrapping action. What that means is we get the initial tool set that we bootstrap into an Amazon account and basically have that, the bootstrap basically contains the blueprints, the deploy automation, the test automation, and the orchestration tools. Once you have those initial bootstrap done in an Amazon account, so we also have orchestration tools like Jenkins and the pipeline tools. So based on the categorization of your workload, if am I hosting a workload that hosts public data set? Am I hosting a workload that has a CUI that's intranet only? Am I hosting a sensitive workload that has a higher security requirement, maybe a classified workload? So based on that, we can pick the blueprints that can meet those requirements and basically run through the pipelines. So at that point, you have the pipelines orchestrating these blueprints to build your first, your transit VPC. That's where you build that so that you have a transit so that you can transit into the enclave, and then build a security enclave where you can have your posture management tools to vulnerability management tools, and then get into the management stack side of it, where you basically start with the DNS and go through the whole stack provisioning. At that point, the orchestration, once it's complete, the bootstrapping action and the orchestration, you will have a guardrail in that enclave to meet your impact level. It can be a FISMA low, moderate, high impact level on the civilian side, or on the DoD side, it can be impact level 2, impact level 4, or a 5, or maybe even a 6. So that once you have that guardrail in place, the applications, based on the way they're zoned, then we go through the migration process, and those applications get into those, with the base AMIs baked, with your STIGs, operating system STIGs, your software and application, everything STIG, your STIG scores, your vulnerability ACAS scans done, so that I'm building, because what's happening here is I'm building the base foundation, but also doing migration. And during the migration, you have the artifacts needed for that RMF ATO being generated, because that's the scale factor of applying the security controls and also gathering the artifacts during phase 2 and phase 3, the step 2 and step 3, right? So what am I doing in step 2? I'm selecting my controls based on my categorization. What am I doing in step 3? I'm basically implementing my controls. So what we do during that time is, bake the deep security agents in there, trying to get the assets, migrate the application, get it to a state where it's ready to go, and then hand off to step 4, which is where my SCA is ready to assess my application posture. So all these is the automation that happens behind the scene with Framework, with the security tools baked in, so that I can get to a configuration where it's a desired for that categorization, right? So that's how we bootstrap these applications, get them in, and also the guardrails set up in the cloud.
Awesome, and fantastic advice for any organization looking to start their landing zone, or even in a lot of cases, it's worthwhile to go take a second look at how you deploy new applications and ensure that you can do this repeatedly with consistency and maintain a sane security posture. So from the very get-go, from the very first instance, part of the instance deployed, provisioning a database, creating configuration, piping configuration about knowledge of the control plane's location down to agents, configuration of security controls and policy, even to the point of building the automation that's going to be used to assign security policy or security controls at scale. I'm really looking to do all of that with code as much as possible to get this done at scale. And part of what we found talking to you all and talking to partners like Rain was that, frankly, it wasn't good enough just to have the experience, to have the technology available. If you still had to call Trend Micro to find this expertise, then it really wasn't meeting the bar. And so we've invested heavily in an automation site where you can discover all of the APIs that are available. You can discover use cases, code samples, SDKs in a variety of languages, and then also an open source set of projects on GitHub where you can go find what code or what integration use cases have been useful for other organizations that are like-minded, and how to leverage those technologies to integrate deep security with SNS, with Lambda, to be able to deploy deep security technologies easily and repeatably. The other thing that we found really early on, and I think was really a step above for organizations working in the AWS space, even over some of the challenges we'd seen with security technologies in the past in terms of integration to an infrastructure, found it incredibly important to be truly integrated with AWS as a partner and in the ecosystem. Standing up some technology wasn't that great. We found some folks that were occasionally quite irate if you called an instance a VM. Being really part of the infrastructure, offering technology the same way that AWS offers technology, being able to integrate to those services, knowing that we're not the center of the world, became really, really primary use case for how we work with organizations and deliver value to our customers. Yeah. The second thing that we found was in the neighborhood of partnership and expertise was AWS, in addition to changing the way that you deploy technology, the way that you're able to automate technology, and provide value to your organizations and agencies, really changed the way that we consume and procure technology. And in an environment where I might have 5 instances one day for my application, on the next day I might have 3,000 instances to serve the new demand for that exact same application, buying a bucket of licenses didn't always make sense. Right. And so we found, I don't know, Bernie, if you see the same thing regularly, especially in the federal space, we found that organizations really wanted to be able to procure their security technology and third-party integrations the same way that they procure AWS services and technology, which is mostly to say, as they go, pay for what they use, and to have it show up on their AWS bill in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I mean, we see that as much as we talked about automation and trying to repeatably deploy an application or a stack, licensing matters, right? Because if I have a static license, I'm stuck with that license, trying to use any of the Amazon features like Elasticity, scaling out, scaling in, and trying to meet my workload demand can be a blocker. So we should be able to have, flexible licensing models so that I can provision that infrastructure, and then bootstrap all the things and bring up my stack up and running with a license with pay-as-you-go and just use it as much as I can. Even in, in the BDSS as well, as I have my transit VPC and the workload goes up, I should be able to scale out my resources to basically guard the enclave, right? Even on the management services, if I have, I should be able to scale it and have a very flexible licensing model. We see that very much. But pay-as-you-go is something that helps with the automation story so that we can do this automation and still deploy these in a consistent way.
Awesome. The last place is really just expertise in the ecosystem, and this is super pertinent for me personally in the way that I work with organizations, and my sense working with Bernie is that this is really similar for Rain. Most often, we're called upon not to be experts in our products and technologies.
Right.
We're called upon to be experts in the way that you need to work, in the way that you need to be able to grow and provide value and move quickly in AWS. And that's a really key thing for a partner. So knowing that they understand what an auto-scaling group is and the challenges that it prevents for provisioning workloads. Understanding Elastic Beanstalk and when you might want to use it versus container technology versus an EC2 technology versus moving to something completely out there like serverless. And understanding the differences between the way that those technologies are provisioned or governed or can be secured, and the unique challenges to each one of them is really key when finding a partner to work with, and has been one of the great things for me working with Rain. And then also looking for the way that organizations deliver that type of knowledge to you. So whether that's code samples or it's blog posts or thought leadership, or just a GitHub project that says, yep, you can download this code, and this is how you can get an integration with GuardDuty so that your endpoint technology or other infrastructure can respond to findings from an AWS service. What's next? This top one is not my quote, but I really, really loved it. It's a friend of mine, an AWS solution architect, and I'm not really sure that he was being kind to me when he said it. He said, if you can't automate the third-party product, then it's really not built for AWS. This has been a theme for me. It's something that I look at whenever I'm evaluating a technology that we're looking to include in a product or working with a partner in the way that they deploy products, and is certainly a really exciting thing about the way that Rain delivers value to their organizations. And it's a theme that I would urge you to keep in mind. Next up, for an example, if you want to go look at, especially for deep security itself, examples of the way that you can automate deployment of entire tool sets, application chains, and security tools automatically provisioned. I would suggest you look at the AWS Quick Starts for the NIST Enterprise Accelerator. It's very cool technology. I love that AWS supports an ecosystem where this is just code that you can go download and you can use in your own environment, or you can modify in your environment, or see what's possible and help your organization understand if this is something that you want to develop a skill set for in-house and be owners of, or if you want to find a partner who's really, really got this down, has become experts in helping organizations succeed here. And last but not least, a little plug, come find us downstairs on the booth, either for any questions you have about automation, how we can help your organizations to more quickly migrate workloads and application sets up to AWS, or about any of the security controls included in Rain's capability set or in the Trend Micro Deep Security products line. Really love to come learn from you what your challenges are and how we can help you move forward if possible. Got a few minutes left. I know that in this audience, sometimes there's some sensitivity to sharing questions out loud. So I'll give Bernie a minute, but certainly if anyone has some questions, we'll hang out up here for a few and would love to chat with you. Good?
Yep.
All right.
We'll hang out, and if you have any questions, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks very much for joining us.